The wind had been whispering warnings all afternoon, stirring the golden dunes into restless waves. But none of the men had paid it any mind. They were too caught up in the thrill of their desert excursion, their laughter and easy banter echoing across the vast emptiness of the UAE's Rub al-Khali. Adam Parker adjusted his designer sunglasses and surveyed the endless horizon, his boots sinking into the soft sand as he trailed behind the group. The others had pressed ahead, following their guide toward the next ridge, eager for the promised dune bashing that awaited them. The rumble of luxury off-road vehicles in the distance made him grin. This was exactly the kind of reckless fun they had come here for. It was Samir's bachelor party after all, a week-long escape for a tight-knit circle of men who had built their fortunes young. Wealth had afforded them everything: private jets, 5-star resorts, exclusive experiences most could only dream of. But this trip, this sun-scorched adventure in the middle of nowhere, was meant to be something different. A break from boardrooms and city lights, a celebration of friendship before Samir tied the knot. Adam lingered for a moment longer, raising his phone to capture the vastness of the desert. The sky was a brilliant cloudless blue, the dunes stretching infinitely in every direction like frozen waves of gold. The wind picked up, gusting against him as he framed the perfect shot. And then he heard it, a sound like distant thunder, low, rolling, unnatural. He turned, squinting into the horizon. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shimmer in the air, the way heat distorted the landscape. But the shimmer thickened, darkened. It moved. The realization struck him like ice in his veins. A sandstorm. "Shit," he muttered, lowering his phone. The wind screamed now, no longer a whisper but a feral thing, clawing at his clothes, hurling stinging grains of sand against his exposed skin. He shielded his face with his arm, turning in the direction the others had gone. But they were gone. The dunes, the tracks they had left behind, even the distant vehicles, everything had vanished behind a wall of swirling gold and rust. The desert had swallowed them whole. Panic coiled in his chest. "Samir!" he shouted, but the wind ripped the name from his lips before it could carry. He took a step forward and felt the world shift beneath him. His foot plunged into the loose sand, the ground giving way as he stumbled forward, disoriented. The sky was gone, replaced by a whirling, suffocating vortex of dust. The storm had taken the world, and he was alone. Adam planted his feet, forcing himself to stay calm. The desert guide had mentioned this. If you get lost, stay put. Let the rescue come to you. Running blindly would only make things worse. He repeated the advice like a mantra, inhaling slow, measured breaths through his scarf as the wind howled around him. But then the sand began to swallow him. It gathered at his boots, pouring over his ankles, shifting and restless. Every second he stood still, it pulled him deeper, as if the desert itself was trying to claim him. His heartbeat hammered against his ribs. A fresh gust slammed into him, and he stumbled back, his footing vanishing beneath him. He cursed and turned in a slow, panicked circle, searching for anything, a landmark, a silhouette, a break in the endless storm. Which way? He didn't know. The storm had erased every sign of direction, every footprint, every familiar shape. The thought of wandering in the wrong direction, of walking himself deeper into the abyss, tightened around his chest like a vice. Then his mind betrayed him. It conjured images of his own bones, bleached white by the relentless sun, half buried beneath the dunes. Days from now, weeks maybe, his friends would sit in an air-conditioned office discussing his fate in hushed tones. Maybe they'd send out a search team, but it wouldn't matter. He'd be long gone, just another lost traveler claimed by the empty quarter. The thought made his breath quicken. He had to move, but where? Then, through the shifting haze of sand, he saw it. A shape. A figure standing impossibly still amid the chaos. Just far enough away that Adam couldn't make out the details. A mirage? A trick of the storm? No, it was real. The figure lifted an arm and beckoned. Adam's stomach twisted. A surge of relief battled with unease. Who the hell is that? The storm had swept in so fast, there shouldn't be anyone else out here. The tour group was behind him. The camp was miles away, and yet, there the figure stood. Another gust slammed into him, nearly toppling him over. He had no choice. He couldn't stay here. Gritting his teeth, Adam forced his legs to move, pushing through the storm toward the waiting silhouette. Adam pushed forward, each step a battle against the wind and shifting sand. His legs burned, his breath came in ragged gasps, and still the figure remained just out of reach. It never seemed to move, always standing, always waiting. Yet no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't close the distance. Minutes bled into an hour. His throat was raw from breathing in the grit-filled air, and his body ached from trudging through the ever-changing dunes. The world had become a swirling golden nightmare. The sky and ground indistinguishable in the storm's wrath. He was losing his mind. The realization hit him like a gut punch. He had heard stories, how the desert played tricks on the eyes, how men saw things that weren't there in the heat and desperation. Was he chasing a hallucination? Was he already dead and just didn't know it yet? His vision swam. His body swayed. "No," he growled, shaking his head as if he could physically dislodge the creeping madness. He cupped his hands around his mouth, summoning the last of his strength. "Help me!" he shouted, his voice raw and desperate. The wind shrieked around him. The sand clawed at his skin. And then, stillness. The wind didn't stop entirely, but it softened, as if some unseen force had tamed it. The choking sand no longer blinded him. The storm still raged beyond, but in front of him, the air had cleared just enough for him to see. His heart nearly stopped. The figure was gone, but in its place, barely visible through the haze, loomed the mouth of a cave. It was carved into the base of a jagged rock formation, its entrance dark and yawning like the throat of some waiting beast. Adam blinked, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This hadn't been there before, had it? He didn't have time to question it. The storm was still howling behind him, and standing out here any longer was suicide. With one last glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see the figure watching him, Adam stepped into the cave's mouth and disappeared into the darkness. Adam collapsed against the cool stone wall, his chest rising and falling in deep, ragged breaths. The air inside the cave was thick and stale, but at least it was free of the stinging sand. He pulled his scarf down and ran a trembling hand through his sweat-damp hair, his mind still reeling from the strange, almost supernatural way he found this place. As he tried to steady himself, a sound drifted from outside. A deep, rhythmic whooshing. Adam tensed, his exhausted mind struggling to place it. It wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too alive, It reminded him of something. Wings. The thought struck him out of nowhere. The slow, powerful beat of enormous wings. His breath caught in his throat as he strained to hear past the storm. But after a few seconds, the sound was gone, leaving only the mournful howl of the desert wind. Adam shook his head, trying to dismiss it. He was dehydrated, delirious, and on the verge of collapse. His mind was playing tricks on him, just like the figure in the storm. Leaning his head back against the stone, his eyes closed. The cave was safe, at least for now. He would rest, regain his strength, and figure out what to do when the morning came. Just a few minutes. Sleep claimed him almost instantly. When he woke, the cave was silent. For a moment, Adam didn't know where he was. Then the memory slammed into him. The storm, the endless dunes, the shadowy figure, the cave. His body ached from exhaustion, but something had pulled him from his sleep. A shift in the air. A presence, maybe an instinct. He blinked groggily and turned toward the entrance. The storm had passed. The sky outside was a deep, endless black, the full moon hanging high and bright, casting silver light across the sand. The desert was transformed, eerily beautiful, almost otherworldly in its stillness. As his vision adjusted, something inside the cave caught his eye. A glimmer. Toward the back of the cave, just beyond the reach of the moonlight, something shined. Adam's breath hitched. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. Maybe it was the trick of the light. Maybe he was still half dreaming. But as he peered into the darkness, the glimmer didn't disappear. Something was back there, and it was waiting to be discovered. Adam groaned as he stretched, his joints popping from the stiffness of sleep. His body protested, but curiosity outweighed his exhaustion. He rubbed the grit from his eyes and turned back toward the glimmer in the shadows. Carefully, he lowered himself to his hands and knees and crawled deeper into the cave. The air grew cooler the further he went. The rock beneath his palms smooth and untouched by time. The object gleamed faintly as he reached for it, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. He lifted it cautiously, turning it over in his hands. It was heavy, solid, but covered in a thick layer of sand. The shape was strange, unfamiliar at first, rounded with an elongated spout and a curved handle. He squinted in the dim light, brushing some of the dirt away with his thumb. Still unsure of what he was looking at, he carefully made his way back toward the entrance. Outside, the desert stretched before him, endless and silent beneath the pale glow of the moon. The only thing standing out in the horizon was a dark blue mountain. He stepped into the open, letting the light wash over him as he held up the object for a better look. His heart made a small jolt in surprise. It was a lamp. Not the kind you'd find in a modern home, but something old, ancient even. The metal was dull, worn by time, its surface decorated with intricate patterns, the craftsmanship unlike anything he had ever seen. He turned it over, running his fingers along the engravings, marveling at the detail. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "I guess I found the Cave of Wonders," he muttered, glancing back at the dark maw of the cave. The joke was meant to ease his nerves, but the weight of the lamp in his hands felt strangely significant, as if somehow this was what he had been led here to find. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Adam turned in a slow circle, scanning the horizon. Nothing. No signs of his friends, no glow of the city lights, just the endless ocean of moonlit dunes stretching in every direction, and a single lone mountain in the distance. He let out a slow breath, the weight of isolation settling over him. "Great," he muttered. "Totally, completely lost." His gaze drifted back down to the lamp, its cool metal still resting in his palm. He chuckled dryly, the absurdity of the situation hitting him all at once. May as well rub it and see if I can wish myself out of here. With a smirk, he ran his palm over the surface. Once. Twice. Nothing. Of course. What did I expect? He sighed, shaking his head. He turned the lamp over in his hands, inspecting it more closely. And that's when he saw it. Something moved. His breath caught. A shape, small, spindly, clung to the underside of the lamp. Before his brain could fully process what he was looking at, the creature scuttled. A camel spider, its long, spindly legs skittering wildly, its pale body blending almost seamlessly with the metal. Adam yelled in pure instinctive terror and flung the lamp away from him. The heavy object clanged against the rock entrance of the cave, the impact loud in the otherwise silent desert. A sharp crack echoed as the metal split, its top snapping off completely. The lamp tumbled to the ground, landing in the sand with a dull thud, the arachnid wandering off back into the cave, seemingly unhurt. Adam stood frozen, his breath ragged, his skin crawling from the brief but horrifying sight of the creature. His heart slammed in his chest as he scanned the ground, but the creature was already gone, scurried away into the darkness. "Jesus," he muttered as he ran a shaking hand through his hair. "Just perfect." His frustration flared as he glared at the lamp, now lying broken in the sand. Great. He had probably just destroyed an actual antique. But then the air changed. A deep, unnatural rumble vibrated through the ground beneath his feet. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. And then, from the shattered lamp, something began to rise. Adam stumbled back, falling, his breath catching in his throat as the impossible unfolded before his eyes. From the broken remains of the lamp, smoke, thick, dark, and writhing, poured into the night air like ink dissolving in water. It twisted and coiled with a life of its own, rising higher and higher. A sound filled the air, crackling, like the roar of a distant fire, like embers stirring in a windstorm. The smoke took shape, stretching into something tall, humanoid. Then, with a sudden, violent snap, the form solidified. Before Adam stood a being unlike anything he had ever seen. Its body resembled charcoal, as if it had been shaped from cooled volcanic rock, dark and smooth, yet fractured with glowing red fissures beneath the surface. It was draped in deep crimson silk, the fabric flowing unnaturally, as though it moved in some unseen current. Where a face should have been, there was only shadow. But set within that void burned two ice-blue orbs, cold and unnatural, like frozen flames. Adam's pulse thundered in his ears. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this wasn't real. The exhaustion or dehydration was playing cruel tricks on him. Then it spoke. "Marhaban bialadi irrani min kafasi." The voice was deep, resonant, carrying the weight of ages, as if countless years had been compressed into each syllable. The being's glowing eyes locked onto Adam, piercing through his very existence. Adam swallowed hard, his throat dry as desert sand. "What?" he managed to choke out, his voice barely more than a whisper. The creature tilted its head slightly, the silk of its robes shifting with the motion. Then, in perfect, eerily measured English, it spoke again.
Greetings, one who has freed me from my cage.
Adam sat frozen, his brain refusing to process what was happening. His mouth opened, then closed again. This isn't real. This can't be real. The being watched him in silence, its burning blue eyes unblinking. The air around it hummed, the space it occupied feeling wrong, as if reality itself bent slightly to accommodate its existence. Finally, the creature spoke again.
Rise, so I may fulfill my duty and reward your kindness before I meet with my master.
Adam blinked.
Reward?
His breath was shaky as he straightened, his knees still weak. His mind screamed at him to run, to wake up, to do anything but accept this was actually happening. But then he said it.
Wait, this is real.
He laughed weakly, though there was no humor in it.
You're an honest-to-God genie?
The being stared at him, utterly emotionless.
I am jinn,
it confirmed, its voice heavy with something ancient, something final.
And I will bestow upon you any gift you desire. But be swift, as I feel my master growing restless.
Adam hesitated, suddenly hyper-aware of the endless desert surrounding him. He turned slowly, scanning the moonlit dunes for any signs of life. His friends, the city, anything. Nothing. But then his eyes landed on the single mountain in the distance, its silhouette tinged with a strange blue light. Now that he thought about it, it stood out starkly against the otherwise golden moonlit sand, an unnatural glow pulsing from its jagged peaks. Adam swallowed, his gut twisted with an instinct he couldn't quite place. He glanced back at the jinn, its glowing gaze unwavering. Somewhere unseen, its master was waiting, and Adam had a choice to make. Adam tapped his chin, still struggling to grasp the insanity of his situation. A real-life genie, or rather a jinn, stood before him, offering 3 wishes, like something out of a fairy tale. Except this was real. He cast another glance around at the barren desert, the cold night air brushing against his skin. His first instinct was simple: get out of here. But something in him told him to save that wish for last. If this thing was really going to grant him anything, why waste the opportunity? I could wish for endless riches, he thought, smirking to himself. A vault full of gold, an offshore account with more money than I could ever spend. Or maybe something more extravagant. A mansion in Belize, perched on a pristine beach where he could live out the rest of his days in absolute luxury. He chuckled to himself, shaking his head. This was insane. Beyond insane. Adam looked up at the jinn, its unmoving, charcoal-like face betraying no emotion. So I just say it? He asked, still half expecting this to be some elaborate fever dream. Just like that, and you'll make it happen? The jinn gave him the smallest nod.
Speak your desire, and I shall make it so.
Adam hesitated. He could have anything. Yet for some reason his gaze kept drifting back to the blue glowing mountain in the distance. A small voice in the back of his mind whispered that something was off. That maybe, just maybe, he needed to choose his words carefully. The jinn's eyes glowed a bit brighter, its expression unreadable as it waited, patiently, for Adam to make his choice. But still the pressure built like an invisible weight pressing down on Adam's chest. He was standing before a being of unimaginable power, and yet he felt more human than ever before. The weight of the moment, the magnitude of the wish, it was almost too much to bear. His mind raced through possibilities. He could wish for world domination, or to turn every ocean into pudding. like some absurd fantasy. But the more he thought about it, the more overwhelmed he became. The jinn's eyes, those cold blue flames, were like a furnace, burning through his thoughts, melting away his clarity. And then, in a moment of panic, he blurted it out. "I wish to be the world's richest man for the rest of my days." There was a sharp intake of breath from the jinn, though no physical movement occurred. The desert around them seemed to pause for a moment, as if even the wind held its breath. The jinn's ice-blue eyes locked onto Adam, and for a long, agonizing second, Adam felt as though the core of his being was being measured, weighed, scrutinized. Then the creature nodded slowly.
"As you desire."
A low, resonant hum filled the air. Adam's heart skipped a beat. He looked up just in time to see a ripple of power emanating from the jinn, a shuddering wave that spread outward through the air like the first ripple of a stone into the water. The ground beneath Adam trembled slightly, as if the very earth itself was responding. His mind raced. Was this it? Was it happening? The jinn raised one hand and pointed toward him.
"The wish is granted,"
it intoned, its voice deep and final. Adam stood there, completely bewildered, his heart racing as the world around him remained unchanged. He had just wished to be the world's richest man, to have fortunes beyond measure, and yet nothing. No shimmering gold, no mountains of wealth, no sudden explosion of riches. Just the same barren desert, the same silent sky. He blinked and looked around, trying to make sense of it. Was he meant to feel different? Was something supposed to happen? The jinn's glowing ice-blue eyes remained fixed on him, expressionless, as it stood silently before him. For a moment the silence felt oppressive, and Adam's stomach tightened in confusion. The desert wind howled faintly, but there was nothing else. No dramatic changes, no transformation. He could still feel the rough desert sand beneath his feet, the night's coolness on his skin. "Wait," Adam stammered, still staring at the jinn. "What's going on? I made a wish. I'm supposed to be the world's richest man, right? Where's that?"
"Your wish has been granted,"
the jinn interrupted, its voice deep, a resonant echo that seemed to vibrate the air itself.
"But the effects are not always immediately visible to mortal eyes."
Adam's brow furrowed. What does that mean? The jinn shifted slightly, its form exuding an eerie calm.
"The wealth has been woven into the fabric of existence. Your desires have already been answered. Yet, there is no time for you to observe its fruits."
What do you mean, no time? What's happening? Why can't I see anything? Adam's voice started to rise with frustration. The weight of the situation, the strangeness of it all, was beginning to overwhelm him. The jinn stood unwavering, like some ancient sentinel.
"Because now my master comes,"
it said in its low, unblinking tone.
"It is time for me to fulfill my true purpose. I will be reclaimed. Your wish has been granted. It is now time for you to wait, for he shall come for me soon."
Adam's heart skipped a beat as the jinn's words sank in. Master? His mind raced again, trying desperately to piece things together. This wasn't how he'd imagined it at all. He expected riches, a sudden dramatic change in his reality, something tangible, anything, but this was completely different. Suddenly, the weight of something darker seemed to press in from the edges of the desert. Adam could feel it, an invisible force pulling at the air, a thick tension hanging between them. And yet, despite his confusion, Adam knew one thing for sure. There was something much bigger, much more dangerous going on than a simple wish for wealth. Something or someone was coming. Adam's voice cracked as he shouted, frustration and disbelief taking over. "But what about my other 2 wishes?" He was almost frantic now, his hands trembling as he looked to the jinn, hoping for some form of explanation, some hint of a loophole. "I must have misunderstood," he thought. "Maybe there's still a way out of this. Maybe there's still time for me to make something right." The jinn, its burning blue eyes, as unreadable as ever, didn't flinch. It stood there motionless, as Adam's heart pounded in his chest.
"Wahad, one is all I offer,"
the creature intoned, its voice unwavering.
"I do not know why you would expect more."
There was an almost dismissive tone to its words, as though it had seen countless mortals make the same mistake, the same folly.
"Though you should have used the power more wisely."
Adam's stomach twisted. More wisely? How could he have known? He had no idea what was coming, no idea of the true nature of the being he had just unleashed into his life. He thought it was a game, a wish for wealth, a simple indulgence. But now, as he looked around the desolate desert, as the very air seemed to thicken with something he couldn't name, he realized how out of depth he truly was. A whooshing sound filled the air, cutting through his thoughts, loud and unnerving. Adam spun around, his eyes scanning the horizon. The blue mountain in the distance began to tremble, but not in a way he expected. It rose. Rising from the desert floor, it seemed to stretch impossibly higher, far beyond any natural peak. The glow around it deepened, unnatural, ethereal, like a living thing, alive with ancient celestial power. The shape became clearer. "It's not a mountain." A sharp intake of breath escaped Adam's lips as the full enormity of the creature before him was revealed. A gargantuan eagle, its feathers flowing a deep, radiant blue, so vibrant that the moon seemed dim by comparison. Its wings massive, stretching into the sky, unfurled slowly, each movement like the beat of an ancient drum, sending ripples of force through the desert air. The very ground trembled beneath Adam's feet, as though the earth itself was bowing before this impossible creature. The eagle's eyes, deep, endless pools of azure fire, fixed directly on Adam. They seemed to pierce through him, down into his very soul. Its beak was sharp and fierce, the size of an entire mountain. Adam couldn't move, couldn't breathe.
"My master,"
the jinn said, its tone softening for the first time, almost fond, staring up at the blue eagle, its form bowing slightly.
"He comes."
The air crackled with the weight of the moment. The ground beneath Adam seemed to vibrate in resonance with the eagle's presence, as if the earth itself knew that something ancient and terrible had arrived. The jinn's words echoed through the desert like a death knell. "He comes." Adam felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. He had made his wish, but in the shadow of this massive glowing creature, the weight of his decision felt like a mistake. There was power here, power beyond what he could comprehend. Adam's pulse raced as his legs burned with the frantic urge to escape. He spun around, desperate, looking for any refuge, any shelter. He could still feel the echo of the jinn's words ringing in his ears.
"My master, he comes."
He ran towards the cave, his heart hammering in his chest, praying that it was still there, that he could still make it back to that small, fragile haven he had found. But when he reached the place where the cave had once stood, all he found was an empty patch of sand. His hands trembled as he reached out, desperately brushing his fingers through the grainy desert floor. There was no sign of the shelter, no sign of safety. Gone. He turned back toward the jinn, his voice shrill with panic. "No, no, 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 no!" He dropped to his knees, eyes wild, looking up at the creature in panic. "Please protect me! Please, you have to help me!" His voice cracked, tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. The massive eagle was growing closer. The shadow of its enormous wings stretched across the desert like a cold, inevitable wave. But the jinn did not move. It stood motionless, its blue flames burning bright and unfaltering in the night air.
"I cannot do this."
Its voice was quiet, sorrowful, a resigned finality.
"My master has gone long without my service, and I must apologize."
Adam's heart plummeted. He could feel the air around him grow colder, the weight of the ego's presence pressing down on him. The ground seemed to crack beneath his feet, and the very earth itself groaned under the creature's power. "What does this have to do with me?" Adam shouted, his voice a frantic mixture of fear and anger. He tried to scramble to his feet, to run, but his legs felt like lead. He had no place to go, nowhere to hide. The jinn tilted its head toward him, its dark, ancient face unreadable. Yet now, it bore something that made Adam's blood run cold. A smile.
"My master has always been fond of your kind,"
the jinn said, its voice soft, almost nostalgic.
"Especially the greedy ones. Those rich in flavor."
The last thing Adam saw before the world turned dark was the shadow of the monstrous bird descending upon them both, its wings blocking out the stars, its beak glistening with hunger. He realized that the richest thing about him right now was his flesh.